Hello, friends. We are excited. We are having our fundraiser for our third film, which is going to be a little different than the first two. It's going to be a sci-fi comedy mockumentary. We've got some fun stuff planned for this one. And if you'd like to help us get started with production, that would be incredible. We don't have investors or sponsors, and we have always kept an extremely low budget for our films, and we've been able to do our best with the resources available. Production for the third film has been put on hold due to unforeseen events, but we're ready to get up and running again. We are hoping to start traveling for filming by October. If you would like to help us resume production, step up our game, and continue to bring you enlightening and entertaining films, you can leave a donation using the link right there in the description. Any donation of $50 or more, you'll get a one-on-one discussion with myself, downloads of all films, a PDF of a warning from history, and Lee Harvey Oswald in black and white, as well as the audiobook versions. I really hope to meet some of you on our travels. And we also want to thank you for all the incredible support over the years. We hope to continue to do this for many years to come.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Phoenix Aurelius. Be sure to check out my films. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku Channel, Apple, and many more platforms. It's a great way to help support Forbidden Knowledge News and help us get started with production on our next film. We're booking guests for October. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Phoenix Aurelius. He is a philosopher, alchemist, spagyrist, teacher, and founder of the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy. Phoenix, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me back, man.
It's great to have you back. Last time you were on, we discussed the dark side of magic, curses, hexes, and even some of the negative entities that exist beyond our perception that may even be associated with some of those magical practices. Today, I thought we could get further into the nature of those entities and intelligences, good, bad, or indifferent, as well as ways we can be aware of circumstances or behaviors that may attract these beings. So there's a good bit to get to. Before we do, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and let them know how they can find out more about you.
Sure, yeah. So I've been practicing various forms of magic since I was 8 years old. Been practicing alchemy since I was 16 years old. Didn't know that it was alchemy, though. I started with spagyria. Didn't know that spagyria was part of alchemy until a couple of years later. I think I was about 18 to 19. And then I just delved headlong into the practice, and that got me interested in all sorts of esoteric subjects and hermeticism, lots of other things, and it just kind of broadened my scope of awareness. And being insatiable as I am in my appetite for all things, really, I just kept diving down lots and lots and lots of other rabbit holes. So yeah, folks can find me at phoenixaurelius.org and learn about the full gambit of things that I offer, including all of these spagyric tinctures and minerals and IDF work and all the other things that I do.
Right on. Well, let's learn about some of the intelligences that exist just beyond our perception. We touched on this last time, but I want to get a deeper understanding of the nature of these beings, how to become aware of them, the dangers, and we'll even get into some positive things, some positive beings as well. But let's start with the more negative stuff. Starting with etheric, interdimensional beings, things that we normally won't be able to perceive, but may have very detrimental effects on our daily lives and emotions and things that we're doing on a daily basis. Is there a hierarchy to these types of beings?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on which tradition that you follow,
Hmm.
because in various different traditions, they would say absolutely and certainly. In my own investigations, no, not necessarily. It kind of looks like this. It looks like there are a lot of different teams that are playing for similar outcomes, or a lot of different entities that have similar food stuff we can talk about as well. And they tend to behave in very particular ways. Some of those beings can get, some of those entities can get kind of knocked out of their order of predation, I guess you could call it, by more voracious beings or more voracious entities. But is one really better or stronger, or is there a hierarchy the way that we think about it? Probably not. No, not the way that I have seen things. But the traditional answers from most of the practices of Western occultism, at any rate, would definitely agree so. And also, like, different systems of magic and different systems of entities, demons, etc., from the Far East say that there are too. But we have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And Western entities and demons are largely a Judeo-Christian invention. And by invention, I don't necessarily mean that they just materialized out of thin air as a thought, but it was the way that people tried to take these unseen entities and fit some sort of theory or hierarchy behind it that is very different. And most modern Western occultism is very, very heavily based on the Judeo-Christian types of entities. Particularly, they like to deal with demons. They don't mention many other different types of entities. Even in the Middle Ages, when we were talking about what we now refer to in Aurelian cosmology as Telluric entities, different types of spirits of the earth and rivers, rocks, sacred places, things like that. They also kind of got relinquished into being demons at a certain point, anywhere between about 600 AD really to even the modern era. The practices and the way that we look at them, the official church narratives and different types of things like that, those tend to change over time, but the undercurrent and the philosophy stays exactly the same.
Would you say that we had a different relationship with these beings before the Judeo Christian alteration of the meaning of what they are?
Yes, 100%. Now, my own particular emphasis of study is in Celtic Europe, so primarily Western Europe from Switzerland over, although the Celtic area at one point expanded all the way as far east as, modern day Ukraine, kind of Russia, Ukraine area. The vast amount of what we have archaeological evidence and some anthropological evidence for really is kind of from the Rhine valley westward, and so that's what I'll be kind of speaking more authoritatively about here. But yes, and it always has. Like, our interaction with even seemingly negative entities before the Judeo-Christian era of demonization really went towards trying to placate and create an interdependent relationship with these entities. They noticed that things like crops would fail if the entities weren't appeased. Rivers might run dry if the entities corresponding to the rivers weren't appeased or weren't kept happy. Rains wouldn't fall properly. There'd be, huge, huge series of droughts and things like that. Um, the main thing at those junctures, when we take a look at them anthropologically, they're going to try and tell you that those were deities and that people were worshiping deities. Deities of river, deities of land, deities of whatever. I mean, that's just a really lame anthropological misunderstanding. Of course, they don't have context for how things had happened. And so, anthropologists and archaeologists look at anything and they're like, oh, this must have been used for a ritual. This must have been used for this. And they kind of jump to some very broad and really lame conclusions, realistically. Whereas magical practitioners of the modern era can tell you that exact same thing, that if the telluric entities of any particular area aren't, say, appeased or kept happy, nourished, well fed, reciprocated with respect, etc., then they don't work necessarily in our favor. And one of those big ideas really comes down to agriculture. So, telluric entities in general, there are a lot of different types of groups of them, but in general, their whole job is to maintain the proliferation fecundity of nature. They correspond to just about everything in the natural world, including the spread of mycelium and communications with trees, the communications that the trees have with their micas, with dust particles and other things in order to bring rain, so many other different types of things. And if there's ecological disturbances, such as agriculture, that are, basically it's like Rudolf Steiner mentioned, when people decide that they're going to engage in agriculture, they are essentially kicking telluric entities off of the scene and saying, we as humans understand this as well as you do, and we're
Mm.
going to take care of this whole patch as if it's our own, you're off the scene, we don't need you here. That does two things really. One, it displaces the telluric entities, which they don't necessarily thank us for, but it was common practice to be able to line your fields, especially your agricultural fields or the clearing that you built your home on. You would line these things with very particular boundary stones, and you would bless these stones in very particular ways that would keep negative entities out and allow beneficial or less harmful entities on in order to perform some of the minor duties that telluric entities are good for. So that's one thing. The second thing is if you're going to be clearing your space for like a dwelling, the trees that were on that space would all be protected by a very particular telluric entity or an intelligence of some sort, sometimes referred to as a genius loci, which in is a Latin term that in English basically means the intelligence of a location. And you can't just fully displace them without having some really harmful and serious repercussions. So most people in the past would keep one tree up, and the tree that was closest to the house became the tree that all of the spirits of that land would be able to essentially retreat to and be part of and still have a place in the land with that one tree or perhaps with that one boulder or that one, whatever it is in the landscape that you're working with, where they stay undisturbed, whereas all of the other lands are typically, blessed. Now, you would still go to that tree, you would give alms, you would give offerings to the spirits there. Sometimes the rest of the trees that were used in the building of the house, some of those spirits would actually become the house spirits at that point. So you took what were formerly land spirits, and then those land spirits said, some of them, yeah, I can change my job. I could become a house spirit. That would be okay. And they typically tend to dwell near the hearth of places. And so it's customary to, if you're going to have a whiskey, for instance, to make the first few drops of whiskey on the hearth floor to give to the spirits of the home, thanking them for the warmth and all of the habitat that they provide. Whereas the other spirits of the land that were like, nah, I can't become a house spirit, they stay part of the land, and you still have to give them jobs to do, and you still have to be able to help to provide for them, especially if you, as the domine, the master of this particular location, took it upon yourself to, essentially clear out their area. You are now essentially like the landlord. You have to take responsibility of all of the entities and all of the beings that are on any property that you
Huh.
oversee. Otherwise, you're essentially treating those entities with severe disrespect, and that type of disrespect can be met with an equal, if not more intense level of disrespect on behalf of those entities towards the landowner. So that's
Right.
one really, really important concept. And all different indigenous cultures that I can see, doesn't matter where we point to, all have certain practices like that, even if not the exact same practices, that were really important. So that doesn't necessarily always extend into harmful entities, but telluric entities can become very harmful or have very harmful effects on people if they're not really well stewarded. And oftentimes in the modern age, we think that money is king. And so if you paid money for this land, that's what makes the land yours. In the past, that's not at all. What makes the land yours is that you have made the oath and the pact with the nature spirits to take care of this particular area and them in a very particular way. Otherwise, I mean, let's look at this. Let's take it out of the realm of unseen entities and just put it into the realm of seen entities. So, if we talk about Native American reservations and how they were corralled up, taken off of their own land, corralled up and put into other plots of land that sometimes they may have had some sort of relationship to, and many times they did not. Um, the type, if you don't take care and steward their culture and help them proliferate in the right ways, then it becomes a really sad, atrophying culture, and they end up becoming self-destructive, not only to themselves and to the land,
Yeah.
but also to the people that govern them. And the exact same dynamic applies with unseen forces as well. It's just a kind of a perennial principle there.
Before we get too deep into some of the repercussions that may be experienced, would you say that there are distinctions that you can describe between telluric entities and what we would understand as demons?
Sure, absolutely. In fact, there's this really great French author named Claude Locouteau who has given an enormous amount of information and writings about this, particularly within the context of medieval Europe. And so you get to see in his, he's very specifically French and German, but that extends to a larger base in the medieval era because there was a lot of church influence. And so a lot of ideas were actually pretty similar from location to location across most of mainland Europe at that time. But yeah, so a telluric entity is very specifically an entity that is tied in with the telluric currents of the Earth. The telluric currents of the Earth are electromagnetic frequencies that flow through the Earth in order for the, shall we say, proliferation of all things natural, the flowing of rivers, for instance, and especially underground aquifers, bodies of water that are flowing underground, as well as the growth of trees and plants, the situation of minerals and the formation of various mineral bodies and different types of things like this. And so there are a lot of different telluric entities that overlook those types of things. There are also telluric entities that govern over animal well-being, that govern over just the delicate balance of certain animals in any particular ecosystem and how they're moving and influencing things. And these types of entities historically have been the ones that are responsible for, say, thinning out herds, or bringing in more predators if there are more herd animals that are, deteriorating the plants. So they all seem to kind of work hand in hand. Now, other different types of demons, especially demons, but demons are a subclassification of interdimensional entities. And demons really didn't come on the scene until in most of Western Europe, until we see the arrival of Christianity, where things begin to be very clearly divided into heavenly forces and chthonic forces or hellish forces, clithothic forces. And so all of these telluric entities ultimately began to be seen by the church's view as being a holdover to pagan days and pagan nonsense, and that therefore they were evil entities trying to draw people further from Christ. So we don't really see demons much in the Western traditions until the arrival of Christianity. One might argue that that's possibly from a scholastic level because we didn't have that term, or that many of the Western countries, especially in Europe, that were non-Roman, that they weren't literate or they didn't write or keep exhaustive records. And so maybe we just don't know about them through that method. But through the oral histories, through the legends, through the traditions, and even persisting through the Christian era, we see an entirely different attitude towards what is a demon versus what is a telluric entity. And they're two totally different things. A demon is something that predates upon low, what we would now refer to as very low vibrational states of emotional resonance.
Mhm.
So fear, deprivation, sadness, despair, those different types of things. And they feed on it in a way where they're constantly promulgating fear. They're constantly eliciting this sensation of fear inside of an individual. And while a telluric entity, if it senses that it has been aggrieved or hurt or damaged in a particular way by a particular individual, they may also cause fear towards that individual. That's not their main go-to. Their main go-to is really to just steward over the things that they've been tasked to steward over. They have jobs, they perform those jobs. They get pissed and they do angry things when their ability to perform their job is significantly hindered or when their livelihood has been impacted negatively. Not too much different than the way that the human psyche would work. So a demon typically is a type of interdimensional entity that causes severe fear, and it feeds off of that fear, um, primarily as a way of kind of, if you want to look at it like this, hijacking the consciousness of the embodied individual. And that's because a lot of different entities don't have bodies or regular bodies to work in. They're primarily astral, which is to say that they operate within the electromagnetic spectrum.
Would it be
So
fair to say that demonic entities are essentially etheric parasites?
etheric could mean a lot of things depending on the tradition. So as a technicality, if we open up the term etheric to mean anything that can exist within the human body of the interface between the astral and the physical, which is to say the electromagnetic and the material,
Mhm.
then sure, absolutely. They can be seen as etheric parasites because they are feeding off of your energy, and they are, like most other, small parasites, actually capable of altering the physiology to a degree that it's capable of making an environment more suitable for them. So, like, we know that a lot of intestinal parasites, for instance, can actually release some chemicals and a number of other things. So, some of them have tails, these whip-like tails that they can do weird things with. But the end goal is to produce more cortisol, because the more cortisol that's there, the less that the human immune system is able to seek out and identify these beings and attack them. And so they create more stress-like environments and oxidative damage that basically, they set the hounds on the wrong trail, basically.
Mm.
And so, do demons do the exact same thing? Yeah, absolutely. They manipulate electromagnetic components inside of the human physiology, which primarily relate down to our nervous and endocrinological hiccups, but also through the fascia and our whole nervous system, our nerves. So, like, can they generate pain? Absolutely, just by manipulating electromagnetic frequencies. And of course, that used to at one point be relinquished to this idea of pseudoscience, but in today's age of directed energy weapons and other things, we're seeing that the exact same types of technologies are being utilized by governments and um, other things. Is that we can create severe pain, we can create severe endocrine disruption, we can alter people's ability to digest, even for their heart to continue beating properly. Everything can be impacted just through neurology and endocrinology, and they know that, and they're able to utilize that for their own self-serving purposes in order to be inside of your body. That's
Right.
that's the end goal.
How much does an individual or even group of people's belief affect the nature of these beings? Example, if a person believes that they're afflicted by a demon and they use the traditional Christian exorcism to try and expel the demon, would it work because they believe that's the case? Does it have anything to do with the true nature of the demon and the response to Christianity? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I cannot deny, I've seen it too many times to even try to deny the fact that belief can be an enormously helpful and beneficial thing in eliminating any disease or condition. And
Mm.
that also relates to the entities. And so if a person strongly enough believes that a particular, say, exorcism is going to be effective, that belief that they have may actually supersede whatever initial emotional resonance that they had that drew that demon in the first place. And so, if they're filled with the concept of grace or filled with the concepts of elation or filled with the concepts of hope, all of those are much greater emotional states than, say, despair, depravity, um, depression, etc. And so that alone could be the mechanism that actually changes the emotional or the astral terrain that draws those entities in the first place. So could it work just simply on that principle? Absolutely. But behind that are demons and demonic influence and entities and other things dependent upon belief in order to have effect on individuals? I would say no, absolutely
Mm.
not. And in fact, so many people that I have seen and worked on personally, including myself, have entirely discarded and tried to throw this idea of entities completely out of the window and say, that's old world superstition. There's got to be more explainable answers to why this person's feeling this way other than the supernatural. So we can try to engage in things that would otherwise get rid of it. And many times, we find ourselves being at a dead end. Only, and this is true, whether a person believes or does not believe, they could even have strong beliefs against the fact that it will work. When we perform the IDF work that we do here, the intrinsic data field clearing of these entities, I have yet to see a single person, regardless of their scope of beliefs, that hasn't noticed an enormous difference and then also been able to see the data showing that there was something in their space, there's now no longer something in their space, and the data says one thing that could stand on its own, but the other thing is the person's experience. And if the person is like, nah, there's no chance. I don't have demons. Demons aren't real, blah, 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 blah. But then I run them on this broadcast. They feel a huge difference and a major shift in the functioning either of their psychological or physiological wellness or both. Then that also seems to point to me to the fact that they exist independently of a person's belief system.
Mm. I can personally attest to the power of that IDF technology that you're utilizing. It's incredible. You helped me recently with something that I was going through, and 100%. I mean, I was skeptical at first. I had never done anything like that, but the results are undeniable. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Going back to the telluric entities, let's talk about some of the repercussions people may experience if they are not respectful, if maybe they build something on telluric land. What are some of the things that people may experience?
So historically, at least in Ireland and in Scotland, we have a term for this, and it's called elf shot. Elf shot, fairy shot, etc. Different types of regions call it something slightly different, but the idea is that these entities essentially get you one way or the other, either with an arrow, so the way that it's sometimes conceived, or other different types of mythical style weapons or whatever. But the idea is that once you're hit with these things, you begin to behave in very strange ways. You lose a large sense of your sense of self. You lose a large sense of your connection with the divine. Doesn't really matter what the culture or what the particular sense of the divine is. That you feel more isolated.
Mm.
And then also there are a lot of physical things that can go along with it, and maybe not just to you. So in Ireland, for instance, there's this long-standing tradition of the good people, the Dinema, the Shi, fucking with your cattle, right?
Now,
Is like,
fairies, which you just mentioned, would also be considered telluric entities?
absolutely, yeah. A fairy would be a particular name throughout certain cultures, referring to a very particular type of telluric entity that they have in their landscape.
Okay.
And I don't think that a lot of these cultures actually went into great science to try and dissect the differences between various different forms of telluric entities. And so they all came up with like various names for them. Troller, Alfr, all these things in the Norse tradition that relate to more mystical or mythical beings on the land. Those are kind of what they have. They have Jinn, Djinn, in the Arabic world. They have, and also in Indonesia, they have all sorts of different ways of understanding these things, but they're usually not very scientific and they don't try and penetrate into the subtle differences between them. So if I name a particular type of being like a fairy, um, as long as they are Earth-based or dependent upon the Earth's electromagnetic signature in order to thrive and live and do their functions, do their work, then that's just another form of telluric entity. So these different fairies might actually stop your milk cows from giving any milk, or they may stop or prevent the ability for the milk to naturally ferment properly and thus prevent you from making yogurt or cheese or any other thing like that. They may also affect the individuals. A lot of people got very, 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 very sick. And in the indigenous healing traditions of both Ireland and Scotland, well into the 1700s and still persisting in certain areas even to this day, although albeit in far smaller numbers and in lesser percentage, there are still people, men are typically referred to as cunning men, and the women are typically referred to as wise women who understand enough about the fairies in order to give you a prescription of what to do when these things happen. And when those people end up doing those types of things, they end up appeasing the telluric entities again, or at least appeasing them enough that they release their stranglehold over the health or the psychological well-being or the cattle health or the land health or whatever of the affected party. And so and this is something that I still see time and time and time again is if somebody has telluric entities, this is even on my website under the Eliminate Ends Mahike and Entities IDF protocol that we offer, is that if somebody has telluric entities, about probably 60 to 70% of the time, the broadcast alone will not actually take care of it. And if it doesn't take care of it, I see it in the data and then I send them a suggestion that says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about all of these times that you've been in nature, any place. It could even be in your yard where you went out and you use an excavator to pull up a stump or to
Mm.
remove boulder or take a chainsaw and knock down the tree or in the middle of the forest. One of my friends had this interesting story where she was walking through a forest in deep Appalachia one day. She's an herb harvester, so it wasn't unusual for her to be doing this at all. And she saw this beautiful rose bush, and on the top of this rose bush was like one crowning flower that was just absolutely amazing. In her mind, she thought, I probably shouldn't harvest that, but she didn't listen to that. She did it. She did that anyway. She harvested that flower. Shortly thereafter, she went bonkers. I mean,
Oh,
she was thinking that people were talking to her through her head, that she had voice to skull technology going, that she had,
wow.
which can also be a real thing. I've worked with other clients that do have a voice to skull technology thing. So, when I get these clients, I have to say, okay, I have to assume that they know what they are talking about and that their experience is real. It seems really weird and contrived that they would try and make all of these things up. So I have to try and assume that the sensations that they have are real. The hard part for me is trying to differentiate what is causing what, because to somebody who is lesser learned or doesn't have the ability to try and find what these actual causes could be, any number of metaphysical things that they learn about could actually be the causation, and whatever seems the most likely to them for whatever reason is obviously what they're going to pass on to me as what they think happened. So anyway, she harvested this flower. She had all sorts of crazy effects, and this went on for years. And she's a high level magical practitioner like myself and like other magical practitioners that I've worked on. She was like, I've been trained to get rid of entities and demons and blah blah blah, so I'm going to just run myself through all this work. ran herself through all this work, and she was literally at a suicidal point just a few years after this, where she contacted me and said, Fia, I really need your help. Like, I have done everything. Like, I've driven iron spikes into this. I have iron nails all over in my house. I'm doing horseshoes. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm performing these things. I need you to find out what's going on. And I found out what was going on. It was a bad case of telluric entities. And I asked her, I said, I need you to just think for a minute about some time that you were in nature where you took something without giving an offering of equivalent kind of payment or value for that thing,
Yeah.
and times where you didn't even ask permission. And she immediately went to this rose. So I went into my IDF software, did a custom question investigation, found out, yeah, 100% that's it. She went out, made an offering of tobacco to that plant, and done. Literally
Wow.
that day, that minute that she offered that tobacco and stated her contrition for behaving in a way that was incongruent with her own belief system, actually, that the telluric entities govern over these things. She was like, I even believe that stuff. And I just wasn't paying attention to it, and I wasn't listening, and I wasn't walking my own talk. And I said, They may have enacted this upon you in a way that was disproportionate to the grievance because you know better. We don't
Mm.
know, but that was definitely one of my ideas. But yeah, and I see this all the time with clients is that if they have telluric entity levels that are showing that they were aggrieved, I just ask them, think about a time when you maybe did something in nature that was disrespectful, whether that was breaking branches off of a tree that maybe you shouldn't have, or just setting up camp or trollopsing through a place without reverence and respect, or taking something, especially, if you go to, say, Yellowstone and you take some of that basalt or some of the obsidian, there's a very good chance that unless you asked and gave something of equivalent value, aside from, federal law saying that you can't take shit from
Yeah.
from federal parks, there are repercussions to those types of behaviors and to those types of actions. And so the best and the safest way is to assume that every area still has telluric entities that are perfectly intact, and to just behave in a way that is respectful, and maybe even if you don't know what's respectful, to simply ask for guidance to keep you away from doing disrespectful things, and just always err on the side of caution. If you want to take something, make an offering of some sort where it is actually a little bit of a sacrifice on your part to give this thing. It costs money, it takes time, it does whatever,
Hmm.
order for the things that are taken, or used. And if things are on your property, realize that you don't own your property. Only in the law of man do you own your property. In the laws of nature, there's a much different system, and nothing can be owned. Everything is only borrowed. And so, can you borrow that thing? Did you get permission to borrow that thing? And what is the kind of contract for your use of that particular thing? When does it need to go back, for instance? Is it like a library book? Or does
Yeah.
it stay with you, and does it stay with your ancestors because you've paid that debt? Or do you have to continually pay a debt in order to use that thing, right?
Yeah.
Because these are just the types of questions that people should ideally be asking themselves and considering in order to keep themselves ideally safe, but also to show mutual respect for nature and what it has to offer us.
Hmm. I'd love to get your thoughts on the most extreme possibilities when it comes to interacting with telluric entities or otherwise. I'm sure you've heard missing 411 stories, people just going missing in national parks. I've heard accounts of people that claim to be taken to different realms and returned back to our reality miles from where they disappeared, interacting with interdimensional beings while they were there, being offered food, drinks, things of that nature. Have you heard any stories about this, and what is your understanding of the most extreme possibilities of people going missing?
Yeah, well, I've heard a lot about this. I have studied David Politi's work, the Missing 411 Guide, to a great
Mm-hmm.
extent. And I have a colleague named Michelle DeVries who wrote her master's thesis on
Yes.
these missing 411 cases, and she did some really interesting stuff. Now, she hired me as an IDF technician so that she could do custom question investigations to try and gauge her suspicions or her hunches and just see whether an external, a third party source could either validate or invalidate her hunches on these things. But she came to the concept that she just calls all of those things the predator. It's a predator archetype, but there's multiple different sub archetypes underneath that, and yeah, she's got some interesting things. So like some of them are like scientists, and those would be the cases where a person disappears, but then they're returned. So
Mm.
it's just like we relate that to fishing. That would be like a catch and release, right? And our scientists do this to animals in the wild all the time for tracking and scientific purposes, where we may shoot a bear with a trank gun or something and then go in, tag it so that we can see what its migration patterns are, other
Yeah.
things like that. So that presumably also happens to us by other interdimensional entities. Same thing to, where she talks about sport type of entities where they're literally just out there to capture the big buck, for instance.
Hmm.
They don't have any plan to eat this thing. They don't have any, they just want it as a trophy, the sportsman archetype. They
Wow.
also have, the feeding archetype. This would be the type of hunter that says, hey, in order for me to feed my family, I have to stock up my freezer with 2 deer every year at least, that type of thing, right? So they can hunt us for that purpose, for foodstuffs. They can hunt us for lots of different types of things and lots of different types of reasons, and in ways that I still don't fully understand, but I can relate to. There are hunting seasons, and there are also licenses of different
Huh.
forms that can be essentially administered. So a lot of that data convolutes this conversation even more because telluric entities also have a history of sometimes taking people to their realm as well. Um, and we see this especially anybody who's read any of the mythologies of Ireland and the British Isles, you see that Itiluateg or the Dinima, the Dinashi, different types of what they would refer to or what we would refer to in English now as fairy-like creatures can sometimes take us into their world. And there are a lot of interesting repeating motifs that happen as well, like the fairy bride. The fairy bride may actually come from her dimension and choose to live here amongst men for a period of time, but they almost always have some sort of contingency for their being here. And so, I remember one particular story is, yes, I will absolutely marry you and I'll live in your world and I'll bear you children. But if you strike me 3 times with, say, any of the halter components or any of the saddle components or anything that we would use while riding a horse, if you strike me 3 times with these, then I have to go back to my own world. And always by accident. These things are never things that happen deliberately, they're by accident. This fairy woman may get struck once or twice or 3 times with these things, and then she just ups and disappears.
Huh.
So we see different types of motifs like this happening. Can we move in between dimensions? Absolutely. And does the mind ultimately determine how we can navigate through dimensions? My understanding of that is yes. And that I think that that has a lot to do with electromagnetism. Now, of course, scientifically, electromagnetism has everything to do with gravity. In fact, gravity is, first of all, not only not a constant, thank you. It's not only not a constant, but it is something that is directly dependent upon electromagnetism in order to keep it in place. What I'm saying there and what I'm indicating scientifically is that is our dimension as the third dimension of physical, tangible stuff defined specifically by a particular minimum force of gravity that needs to be there in order for us to sense the physical things that are there? And if we are somehow tossed out of that, either by altering a brain wavelength to a significant enough degree or altering an entire area of the brain, like for instance, certain areas of the brain operate at these ultra low frequencies, right? Including the ones that are necessary for keeping our circadian rhythms operating. So these typically run, anywhere between like 6 to 8 hertz, for instance. These 8 hertz frequencies, if those areas of the brain start operating at 10 to 12 hertz instead of 8 hertz, can that actually change the entire perception of that individual's reality, thus rendering them in a new dimension? Yeah, I think so. And there are
Wow.
definitely enough cases like this, especially with near death experiences, coma, etc., where we can monitor those different brain wavelengths and what's happening. And then the person might come out of the coma or come out of the medically induced sleep or come out of the trance or come out of the fever or whatever it is that caused this EMF anomaly to happen in the first place. And are they recounting wild things and having an experience as if they were actually there? Yeah, that happens so frequently. So, is it that these beings are actually taking us into their dimension, or are we all sharing the same space, so to think about, but altering the vibrational frequency at which we are perceiving? And I don't have the answers yet, Chris, but
Hmm.
to the best of my understanding at present, the mechanisms that I think that are most likely at play are the latter, that our brain wavelengths are being altered enough by these entities, or perhaps even by the location that these entities are in. Especially, things like this go on very, very enormously at national parks like Yellowstone and Tahoe, and well, Tahoe it maybe isn't necessarily a national park, but other ones too.
Yeah.
Shasta, Mount Shasta, all these other different types of places. Do those have a long-standing history of telluric entities? Yes, by native legends that have persisted. Yeah, absolutely. Do they also talk about many other different types of interdimensional entities besides what we'd refer to as telluric entities? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, they do. And so, are these the mechanisms that those different types of entities are using in order to create the shift in perception or
Hmm.
a state of consciousness? It could totally be. And could there be a lot more to it? And that's just one facet? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an ultra deep rabbit hole. And the more you go down, the more that you think, oh, I'm close to getting an answer. Then you'll read 30 more accounts that will take you further off the trail and say, well, maybe there's other different mechanisms of action as well. So it's hard to say.
Right. That's so interesting. Would you consider Bigfoot and Dogman to be in similar categories as telluric entities?
Not telluric necessarily. Bigfoot, I still have to rule that one out as maybe being telluric, but it displays more of the features of being an interdimensional entity than just a telluric entity.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is that it can move, by most of the cases that I've read, it can move at completely insane, almost non non-conceivable speeds. Some cases have also seen it stand in one place and then instantaneously stand somewhere else. Some people have heard it use some sort of interesting language. In fact, this was caught on film not too long ago, where they caught these beings clearly having some sort of communication back and forth between them. One of
Hmm.
them sounds slightly higher pitch and more like a female. The other one sounds more like a male, and they're weird grunts and groans, kind of like what we would perceive like cavemen speak to kind of be like.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're kind of thinking that maybe those were Sasquatch style beings. So, it's hard for me to say. Are they physical primarily? Are they tied to the Earth or to a particular geomagnetic location? Or are they completely interdimensional? And right now, again, the jury is out on that one. I can't give any particular type of answer. But for other types of entities that are typically predatory, they don't have the telluric entity signature. They're very clearly predatory. They're very clearly trying to have some sort of effect on the beings that they are after. And so they tend to sit more in the interdimensional entity camp meaning that they did not necessarily originate with this planet or this location and are here for any number of different reasons, just like a person could be in a location for any number of different reasons. Did they travel there? Did they fall asleep and they just showed up there? Did they get deposited there by somebody or something? There's lots of different types of ways of interacting with this, but yeah, the signature tends to be a little bit more on the interdimensional side of things.
Right. Could we be mistaking what we understand as physical extraterrestrials that we believe are coming from different planets as these interdimensional beings? Maybe we're being deceived. Maybe we just have a misunderstanding of what they are. I just have trouble with the physical extraterrestrials coming on tin cans to stick things in our butts, but I'm very open to the possibility. I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Well, this may be popular among some individuals and unpopular among others, but my goal has never been to be popular. My goal is always just to try and be as correct as possible.
Right.
And based on the data I have right now, I do not think that any sort of what we might refer to as extraterrestrial entities that are capable of performing space travel and other things, I don't think that they're going to be the same types of predatory beings that we oftentimes fear.
Hmm.
Also, the mark of extraterrestrial beings and the mark of governmental beings can be, there's a very fine line between those two things. What is advanced human technology that is being tested and written off as extraterrestrial versus what is actually extraterrestrial? There's an extremely fine line there, and I don't know where the line is or how to draw it necessarily yet. And most other specialists would say the same thing. But I do tend to sit more in the camp where I agree with Dr. Stephen Greer that most of the entities that are being called extraterrestrial at this point are not extraterrestrial, but a large portion of them are either interdimensional beings, entities that cannot be seen but that are fully capable of having an impact in the physical because of their electromagnetic influence, or that they're governmental beings, and that most extraterrestrial beings, authentically, if they do exist the way that I hypothesize at present, that they're not responsible for hardly any of the circumstances that people currently attribute to extraterrestrials. So
Hmm.
I agree with you, though, 100% that if I was a form of life that was capable of traveling through the cosmos, I probably wouldn't be doing it in a glorified tin can, for one. Two, I certainly would care less about sticking thermometers and probes up people's asses. I'd care a whole lot more about the caliber of their heart and their minds, and
Hmm.
to see if their evolution matched such a point where I would no longer be seen as a threat, but perhaps maybe as an ally, or perhaps just as another interested party to see what the hell is going on here. Um, so yeah, I don't know, and I don't have the answers to those questions, but I have some speculations.
Right. When you say governmental beings, would you say that they could be chimeras, something created by military industrial complex laboratory?
Yeah, at the expense of sounding completely nuts, I think that that is entirely true. We have certain ideas about that, like things that have been released, even talking about like Montauk Project
Yeah, yeah.
and lots of others where have those programs happened allegedly? Yes. To the best of our understanding, yes. Is it fully admitted? No. Is that a common go-to for all governmental agencies to deny, 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 and then to throw conspiracy on anything that they don't agree with or don't want to fess up to? Yeah, I mean that's classic textbook government case.
Yeah.
So yeah, could some of those beings be like chimera-like entities? Yes. And do we now know that we have been reverse engineering spacecraft since at least the late 40s and early 50s? Hell yes. We have seen all sorts of interesting things where allegedly reverse engineering has gone on, where we've been trying to do other different types of things. Now, I no longer live there, but I was born and raised in Utah, and we have Skinwalker Ranch out there. And anybody who goes to the south side of the Uintas, whether you're right there near Skinwalker or in the mountains up above that area, you see some crazy shit that you cannot explain and that should not be there. And they're not astronomical phenomena in the case of comets, asteroids, more common types of things, but they're seeing things that are very clearly taking up airspace and moving in ways that we think they should not be moving. To me, is that extraterrestrial activity or is that more of testing activity that's happening during the night? I don't know, but I tend to lean more towards the latter.
Before we get to the IDF clearing technology, I want to talk a bit about what people understand as positive entities, angels, things of this nature. Tell us a little bit about your understanding of this, and are they really positive in a sense that they are attempting to help humanity or have our best interest in mind in some way?
So again, angels and that particular term originates with Judeo-Christian types of terminology. And again, we don't have any written or even legendary evidence of that happening until the Christian era in the Western world. There are in other different traditions beings that are like angels or even winged beings, sometimes even winged reptile beings that were very beneficial to the individuals that they came into contact with. How do we define, and this is one thing for me that's really important and for any level of scholasticism around this issue, is how do we define a beneficial impact from a negative impact? That's a huge question because a lot of times a lot of people's experiences with these angelic beings, the more commonly you think about an angel in the West as only having a very benefic type of effect. But when you read historically about the interactions that have happened, and you also read about other experiences that people have allegedly had with these types of entities, it's not all loves, lights, pixies, and sprites. Usually that angel shows them something really horrific as what will happen if they don't alter the course of their direction to in some way, shape, or form. In which case, is that being really helping, or is it just showing what the causal results are going to be if a new direction? How do we define, is that a beneficial experience? Now, what the person took away from it, was that beneficial? Yeah, but was it up to the individual to make the decision to no longer do that? And that's what had the beneficial impact in their life. Sure. So it's really hard for us to say, but there are probably some entities that are exclusively beneficial, but even ancestral entities aren't exclusively beneficial. A lot of ancestral entities, especially ones that died without fully knowing that they died, so in some sort of, say car crash, traumatic accident, um, one minute they were alive, the next minute they were dead with a massive coronary or something. These beings, unless they have certain types of ritual components that are performed during a death ceremony, they tend to hold on to family members who have very similar traits to them, and they try and live out through that individual, live their own karma out through that individual, which is technically one of their descendants. And that is still a type of possession. It will never help the individual that died to actually move through their karma if they try and possess another individual of their family to go through those things, because it's a whole different soul. And the same thing is true about various other different circumstances with ambivalent ancestral entities as well, where they like you if you practice their religion that they had when they were alive. They don't like you if you don't. That type of thing, right? How much can you see eye to eye with your ancestors? And I'll tell you, my ancestors 54 generations ago had entirely different belief systems than my ancestors 3 to 5 generations ago,
Right.
right? Entirely different cosmology, worldview, beliefs. ways of interacting with neighbors, community, the world, everything. It's a whole different thing. So ancestry can kind of get a little convoluted there. But my point in all of that is that even our ancestors and our ancestral entities are not necessarily always beneficial. But can they be beneficial? Like, for instance, if one of your ancestors comes to you in a dream and says, "Hey, you need to avoid doing this. I made that same mistake, and here are the results that happen for me. What do you think is going to happen for you?" And then you decide to make a difference. That can be a very beneficial thing. But was it the entity that had the benefit, or was it you as an independent entity of yourself, espoused in a meat skeleton,
Yeah.
that decided essentially to make the difference? So are there beneficial entities out there? The jury is still out on that one for me. I don't necessarily know that that is true, although I cannot deny many hundreds of user testimonials essentially saying that, "Hey, I had an impact with this entity while under this substance or doing this thing, and this being healed me, and I haven't had any problems since then." But I don't also know what that entity had in it on their
Mm.
end. Were they being paid to do that? Is it their job to do that? Were they just fulfilling duty, or were they actually expressing
Mm.
benevolence? The jury is out for me on that.
You mentioned being under the effects of certain substances. I know that certain substances can attract certain beings or intelligences to be interested in you and maybe attach themselves to you. Is that right?
Yeah. Now, again, that just comes down to electromagnetism, though. Anytime that you take substances that alter, that are what we would refer to as psychedelic or even
Mm-hmm.
psychotropic, that alters your brain chemistry. Brain chemistry is electrochemical, meaning that it's half electromagnetic and that it's half chemistry driven. The electromagnetism is what actually triggers the chemistry to begin working in the right way in the first place. And even if we get right down to it, even minerals, well, technically metals like calcium, potassium, magnesium, sodium, iodine, all of these, they're all metals. How do they interact with us on an electromagnetic level? Well, in order for us to even use them properly, they have to have the right valence, which is all about electromagnetic charge. So these different types of entities, regardless of the sort, they interact with us through these electromagnetic pathways, essentially, and they can alter the perceptions. With that being said, with the preamble of the electromagnetism, these in esoteric philosophy, what these different types of substances do is to bolster and amplify our astral body. And what that literally means in a more grounded modern terminology is that they are altering the electromagnetic displacement of one or more areas of the body. This could be in the piezoelectric fascial network, the liquid crystalline matrix of the human body. It could also be through the neurology or other things. And so these different drugs, they amplify everything. So if we take an amplitude knob, like on an amplifier, for instance, like if we're playing electric guitar or bass or whatever else, as we change the amplitude knob that is labeled volume and we turn that up, that obviously is going to increase the amplitude, not necessarily the frequency. It just increases the amplitude of whatever frequency is being passed through that amp as an electromagnetic thing. These different types of drugs and substances will do the exact same thing. Some of them might only amp up, say, just the liver or just the brain or just the heart or just the spleen or just this particular cell or whatever else, but they drastically amplify these things. Now, whatever emotional resonance is already set inside of that thing is the frequency that it's going to be playing, and then you turn up the volume. And once you turn up the volume, now that can attract other things. Just like when you're having a party at your house at maybe 2 in the morning and the music is really loud, that's going to attract the
Yeah.
police. The same exact thing is going to happen when you have these different interdimensional entities that are on the lookout for these particular frequencies. When they become loud enough, even from great distance, they can hear that, they can see that, they can feel that, and then they become directed towards that as a potential hospitable or habitable situation for them.
Right. Last few minutes we have, I'd like to share with the audience all about your IDF clearing technology, starting with how you developed it.
Well, I developed it out of necessity. So IDF just really stands for intrinsic data field. The concepts have existed in multitudinous different languages and cultures long before the modern era. But IDF really, the way that we practice now was kind of born out of the science of radionics over 100 years ago. And then eventually they came to the concept that, radionics doesn't work the way that they thought, meaning that they thought that everything in the body had a very particular, what we call a tuning rate. And these tuning rates can be accessed essentially by divination, but then we use dials as well. And these dials, when you dial them to a certain thing and you're operating the stick pad, when your fingers stick at a certain area, you stop turning the dial with your other hand. And different types of radionics instruments may have one dial, two dials, three dials. There's some with like 20 or more dials, okay? But the point is that they constantly rub a pad with one hand and then they tune a dial with another while holding an intention in mind, let's say to eliminate an entity, for instance. What is the tuning to help eliminate this entity from this person's space? And first, they weren't thinking about entities 100 years ago. They'd already thrown the baby out with the bathwater, like most of us in the modern era, and they just decided that they were trying to tune into physical things. So they would, take, say, a parasite, for instance, and say, what is the tuning rate of this parasite? And they would run one dial and it stops at maybe 2, and then they run their next dial and it stops at maybe 43, and then they run their next dial and that stops at 7. Well, that now means like 243.7 is the dial rate tuning to get rid of that particular parasite. That's kind of the way that it started. And eventually they proved in court, even due to a medical case, that that's not the way that it worked. And so the entire theory of all of these things in the body operating according to these kind of obscure tuning rates went out the window. And that got rid of the entire science of radionics the way that they thought about it, because they thought that these tunings were kind of like radio dials. And if you tune in to just the right frequency, then you get just the right effect. We now know that that's not the way that they were working. What they were actually doing in their construction and everything was transmitting an electromagnetic frequency into a scalar wave. So we're taking one waveform, making it transverse, and having it operate as a scalar wave, which is really just an octave of an electromagnetic wave, but instead of existing in the astral plane or the electromagnetic frequency spectrum, it is now operating in what we would refer to in occultism and esotericism as the causal dimension, which I don't have like a very grounded term for aside from the quantum realm. In terms of our modern physics and modern understanding of things, the causal is essentially what we'd refer to as the quanta or the quantum dimension. So, with that being said, yeah, the whole technology got handed on to me in a really weird way. That's a long story, so I'll save that for another time. But in trying to help people with various different psychological, physiological, and spiritual disorders that they would come to me with, oftentimes I would find that there were things that I could not impact through supplements and through conventional, like let's say that they have a state of psychosis. And we might go through all of the physiological methods of addressing that psychosis. So I might do some analysis on them. I might see that their fornix has some issues. I might see that a couple of genes are expressed in a weird way. I might see that their gut brain axis is entirely thrown off. I might see all these different things. We go through, we fix all of those things. Everything is coming up and showing fine on their analysis, but they still have these symptoms. How do we address those? And so out of necessity, I had to start picking up older pieces of literature from individuals in the historical past that had also addressed symptoms like these. And of course, the main resource that I go back to over and over and over is Paracelsus, just because he had such a keen and piercing intellect and an ability to make enormous influence. And he talks about the effects of entities and curses and hexes and all sorts of other things as well. And he talks about all of those, and he included those in his system of spagyric medicine. And so I decided that I would just kind of pick up the pieces, leave off from the trail from where he dropped the breadcrumbs last, and just see if I could pick it up. And eventually, I started playing around with things and doing immense amounts of investigation with intrinsic data field investigations to try and see if I could pinpoint what the root cause is. And over in those cases, I kept finding that people had these entities. And I was like, well, okay, that's one thing. So then it reverts back to my magical practices, magical training to try and get rid of them. There are plenty of clients from 2009 even to 2008, 2009 timeframe until about 2017, 18, where I would do ritual exorcism for a large number of individuals. And they were definitely effective, but they were not that effective. And people would still have some residual problems that, if they weren't addressed regularly, turned into the same big problem that they had initially when they came to see me. And so there were weird things like that, and so I just kind of kept chipping away at it, chipping away at it, chipping away at it, and then trying to figure out ways, split testing ways in particular, that I'd be able to use either IDF tunings or ritual exorcisms or magical works or whatever it is, in order to be able to influence these things. And ultimately, over a period of years and hundreds of IDF clients, wellness research clients that I was using IDF on, I should say, we ended up realizing that entities are best cleared exclusively with IDF, but there's a very particular wording and a very particular way that I have to go about that in order for it to work. If I miss a single comma in the descriptions that I'm creating for these tunings, or if I put an extra space in there, I hit the space bar twice, or if I do any of these other things, if I misspell their name, if I do any of these things, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. It doesn't have any effect whatsoever.
Wow.
And so it was really, in some ways, fate and fortune that I came across ways that did work, but that was only driven by thousands of failures before that, and that I was not achieving the desired result. And over probably about 3 to 5 years, the last 3 to 5 years, I did so many of these that I had a lot of split tests that I was capable of running, and I would just put the successes from each split test together, and then eventually that turned into an entire protocol. And after testing that on dozens of people and all getting the exact same effects and the exact same feedback, then I went to my high level magical practitioner friends who are trained to get rid of entities, and I said, hey, like myself, I've been trained to do this. I've run these protocols on myself for a long time. Then I did IDF analysis on myself, and I still have residual levels of entities. They're non-problematic, but they're still residual levels. I ran this broadcast on myself, and I got rid of them. I would like to do the same for you at no cost, to see if your experience is similar to mine and to see if your data is similar to mine. And so we got, a good colleague of mine. His name is Sean Padraig O'Donoghue. He lives in Maine, and he is a priest of two different traditions, including one which is called the Fairy tradition, Feri. Got him to do the same thing. He's also trained to cast entities out and other things, but told me that he was having problems. And when I ran his analysis, it showed high level of entities. And so I said, well, if I can clear these out for you, then that'd be great. I did. His entire life changed shortly thereafter. And I mean, he had some huge impacts from that change that he reported. And I've had a couple of other very high level practitioners who are, I would consider to be adepts or even adepts of the adepts, who ended up having the exact same experience that I did. And so after performing all of that work, eventually it took me about a year or so, because I didn't want to just be known as that guy. I mean, I already do enough fringe things. I didn't really want to be known as the guy who's also now branching into demons and spells and curses and hexes and jinxes and all these other things. But at a certain point, I had to make that service available, because there's a massive, not just a small, there's a massive sociological uptick in people who are reporting these types of things. And when I test them, they have these types of
Mm.
issues. And so we need to match our level of addressing these issues with the amount of issues and the amount of people that are having them. And so that's, yeah, it was born out of
That's
necessity.
awesome, man. Now, you said that there's a noticeable uptick in people that are experiencing this. Any theories as to why?
Hmm. Yeah, I think social media
Mm.
is a big one. Most people, again, maybe at the expense of sounding completely off my rocker, which if you're still listening to me, then maybe you're on the same, in the same boat. But it's like this. Every time you scroll, doesn't matter whether you scroll like this or scroll like this, with the mouse or whatever, you are essentially stimulating a ton of dopamine.
Mm.
Every time that you see something that you like, it gives you a big dopamine response. Every time that somebody likes something that you've posted, you see it, you get a big dopamine response, you get these huge hits. What's the difference between that and smoking tobacco for that dopamine hit?
Right.
Well, there really isn't. The brain doesn't know how to differentiate
Probably more like
that
crack, but
difference.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're entirely
Yeah.
right. Point is, if we draw that back to what we already know about substances and how or why they change the electromagnetic amplification rate of particular emotions, then you have that. Now, I think that most people in modern age feel defeated. I don't know anybody who would argue that in the present age, that most people feel defeated, that they don't want to be living the life that they're living, but there's not a sustainable alternative that they can actually foresee or do within reason of their own capacity to change their own situation. And so a lot of people feel defeated. That feeling of defeat actually translates into the emotion of
Mm.
despair. Despair is like the exact opposite of hope, and it's a very low vibrational state to be in. But when we're amplifying that with thousands of hits of dopamine every day, that's going to draw in a lot more
Wow.
entities. The other thing is that there is a phenomena of social media of TikTok
We talked
witchery.
about that a little bit last
And
time.
exactly. And, you see all these folks on Instagram and TikTok and whatever else doing very low level magical practitioner shit, but getting other people into it without all of the caveats for
Yeah.
safety. And so there are a lot of people that are utilizing their own inherent capacity to perform magic, but doing it unsafely or in an unwise way, which does the exact same thing that a substance does. It is an amplifier to the astral body. And so, again, if there are lower states of emotional resonance within that body, as you're opening up that amplitude and increasing it, now these entities can hear that and they come flocking. So I think that it really all comes back to the same root causes, which is an un an unwise or possibly even an unconscious amplification of the astral body in trying to meet basic daily
Wow.
needs. So if somebody feels really shitty, does scrolling sometimes help? Yeah, sure does. It helps take your mind off some things. But if the emotional resonance and the emotional traumas and toxins that are sitting within that individual are unresolved, and you just turn up the volume, now you're just going to draw in a predator that is capable of consuming that negative or harmful emotional resonance in the same way that a parasite, bacteria, fungi, etc., would be driven to a toxic terrain that has an actual, say, heavy metal toxin, plastic, dioxin, etc., stored inside a tissue. It seems to me like they operate on the exact same principles, just different layers of density.
Wow. This is absolutely fascinating. We covered a ton of great information today. We'll definitely be doing this again. Before I let you go, for those that are interested in finding out more about some of the things we talked about, or they believe they may have entities afflicting them, what is the best thing that they should do?
Well, if you think that you have entities afflicting you, you can always go to my website. You can go to phoenixaurelius.org. Under the IDF Tech header, we have on the far right hand side there's an option for eliminate ens mahike and entities, and that's a service that I offer. If you pay your money and you get tested and you don't have entities or curses or anything for me to clear, we only keep $50 of that money and we make the rest of it as a refund to you. And $50 really just covers my time to put you in my system, start to do your analysis, all of those things. The rest of the money is entirely refunded back to you. So if you don't have a problem, I'm not just going to take your money and leave you high and dry there. If you do have a problem, then I'll go ahead and clear it out. So if you suspect or think that you have an entity, in my opinion, given all of the multitudinous client cases that I've seen, that is going to be probably the most surefire way to determine if that is indeed a problem and if it needs to be cleared. And if so, then I can clear it for you. If not, then when you're just talking about entities, or if you want to learn more, Claude Lecouteau has some excellent resources on this. There are a number of other different researchers in that same vein. They're usually more from a scholastic historical perspective, but you should really look into those sources and read more about them, learn about their lore, learn about their history, learn about maybe even the native traditions in your area, if there are any native elders that you have around that can tell you about any of these things, or that would be willing to tell you about any of these things. Because chances are you would tell a native elder, here's what I'm going through, and they would say, yeah, we know. And you say, oh, how do you know? And then they'll tell you a little bit. For most white folks to earn the trust of native elders to really come clean with a lot of the information, that's a whole other ball game. But still, you have to approach these things with the best information that you have and the best investigative power that you have. So use the resources that are around you and that you have access to do the very best digging that you can do. And my biggest thing is, don't get caught into any system of belief, whether that's trainings that you've had that say that you're going to get rid of 100% of all of these entities or curses, or whether that says you have to avoid all of these things in order to not get the attention of these harmful entities or other things. Belief systems are always a trap. There is no belief system that is ultimately healthy because there are confinements to it. A belief is not necessary when there is data and when there is definitive proof of something. You wouldn't have to believe. So if something is self-evident, it doesn't require belief. Belief only is necessary. And the mechanism for it is tricky too, because you take an emotional sense of certainty and place it over something that you know absolutely nothing about. That's technically what a belief is. And so it's a hard thing to break. So try to open up your belief as much as possible. Just be open to having different experiences and try to learn as much about your ecosystem and entities, whatever else as much as your interest allows you to, and go from there.
Right on. Well, this is such great information. I highly recommend, if you do feel like you have something going on, to utilize this service. I did with extreme success myself. So awesome stuff, Phoenix. Thank you again. Like I said, we'll definitely be doing this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then.